think it's on.
It is
Right?
on.
Hey, Randy.
G'day, Phil.
We want to take a moment. I want to take a moment and chat with you about why this is important to you, why it's your sense of purpose, and how you got here. So take us back. There should be a, I know, it should go fuzzy, and it fades out, and then it gets fuzzy and
No,
fades
it's the
out.
Austin Powers. No, it's was it Austin Powers or was it Garth? The
That's right. That's the C.
yeah. Let's talk about me. That's a great topic.
Yeah.
One of the funny things about when you transition from version 1.0 or 2.0 of yourself into a coach is you stop talking about yourself and you really live in the place where your clients are, wherever that is, and you try and be totally there for them and laser focused on where they're trying to get to. And so it's funny, you sort of and that's fine with me because I'm sure I spent plenty of my life talking about myself, but I just don't do it much anymore. So I'm a little bit out of practice. So this will be interesting.
Well, wait, but what's the narrative? Who wrote the narrative, the sort of universal narrative, the journey? Who's that guy?
I think it was Buddha.
No. The modern one. The one in the last 50 years. The story arc narrative. You have to go into the belly of the whale and come back out
Joseph
of the belly
Campbell?
of the whale. Campbell, yes. Right. What's your Campbellian narrative?
The whole power of myth. And in coaching, we talk about the hero's journey. It's sort of related to that. It's sort of this process. Well, okay. I'm not even sure where to start exactly. I could, you're going to have to help guide me here. So I would say, for starters, that I went off to college with a broad ambition to be involved in sort of public policy.
In an amazing place.
At an amazing place, yeah. It was
guiding you.
I went to Duke. I studied political science and psychology, and elected to stay for law school. They made it too hard for me to leave, which was nice. And came to Washington, DC, and immediately jumped into an environmental law practice in a big international firm, first a big Chicago firm, later a couple of big New York firms. And life was good. I had a robust practice. They treated me well. They paid me well. I took a couple of years off to serve at the United States Environmental Protection Agency in a pretty senior role while I was still in my late 20s, and got to travel around the US and internationally, giving speeches about rivers, oceans, lakes, waters, wetlands. And I loved that. And I started joining a bunch of nonprofit boards, and started a band and coached soccer and
at this point, when you said start a band, the sound of the needle skipping on the record goes.
That's right. Yeah. So
degree in psychology, degree in jurisprudence, law, and you have interest in music, political science.
Yep. And
but that's not a common combination, to study psychology and then decide how to apply it, right, in a way that's not directly.
Yeah, well, I think but all three of those degrees really were in ways that I didn't recognize at the time were people focused for me. I mean, I was a decent lawyer, but I'm sure there were better lawyers around me in the firm, because that was all they did. They lived and breathed that. Whereas for me, I was always more interested in the people, in the problem solving. What I really liked about practicing law was solving big, complicated, people-driven problems. So I really loved sitting in the room with 60 people firing arrows at me and trying to, handle a big negotiation, right, to a win-win.
Is it IQ or EQ to do that?
Well, that's an interesting one. I still think at the end of the day, it's more EQ than IQ, because if you're just trying to be the smartest person at the table, you're going to piss everybody off. Like you're just showing off.
Right.
If you're legitimately trying to get to yes, which is a great book, by the way, Harvard book on negotiation, then it has to be about EQ. And it has to be about, people are fighting and you have to figure out what their real interests are. The classic example is why fight over the orange if one person wants the orange skin for zest and one person wants the orange juice, right? They want two different pieces of the orange. So don't tell me I have to have the orange, but what you need is the orange juice. So I really enjoyed that part of practicing law. I really enjoyed being involved in Washington in the public policy arena and making small moving the needle just a little bit. And life was very full and pretty good. And I was moving very fast and I was pretty driven and probably took up too much oxygen in the room a lot of the time. Not intentionally, but that was just sort of where I was and who I was. And over time, I started to feel like I would go to my partners' meetings and I would sit around the table and I would just have this nagging feeling that these were not my people. Like, this is not my tribe. And I started to think, well, what does that mean for me? Because I got to say, I'm a very fortunate person in that I've been able to pursue my passions by and large in my life. And I have always tried to operate around a sense of call. What am I called to do? And I believe that life is a series of arcs, things that start and they end. And if you can anticipate the end, if you can feel it coming and get yourself ready, and that's part of being resilient, by the way.
We all know what the end is. And we just have to work backwards.
So, yeah. And so I said, okay, I'm being called to let go of this and do something different. And I basically left big law, as I call it, in my mid 40s, right as I was poised to really be a big player in my firm and really do super well. And that wasn't enough to hold me. It was flattering. I liked that, but so I sort of went on a Chautauqua, the old Indian idea of going on a sort of almost like a spiritual walk. The Aborigines in Australia, where I grew up, literally say they go walkabout, and they just wake up one morning and say to their neighbors, "I'm going walkabout," and they walk out the dead tent. They might be gone for years. Like no one knows it's a personal thing. So I sort of went on a walkabout, looked at a couple of different programs at fancy schools, and concluded that I had the tools and the network to do what I wanted to do. And while sitting under a tree thinking great thoughts was appealing at one level, in fact, I was ready and set up to go and do the things that I wanted to do. So I left big law, started my own little law, public policy facilitation, consulting, lobbying practice, joined a couple more nonprofit boards, got very involved in this weird little world called interfaith peace and justice work. And, next thing I knew, I was in places like Jerusalem and Qatar and Oman and Pakistan doing interfaith work, which I found really, really, really stimulating, because that is where I really encountered the other and started to reflect on, what an interesting, diverse, messed up world we live in. And it was fascinating. So I did that for a long while, and I still have a toe in that world. And my beard turned white, and people started to come to me and say, "Hey, you've been on a lot of boards and you've traveled a lot, and you have a background in pretty high level public policy, and what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And they were sort of leadership questions. And I was like, oh, well, I do have some thoughts on that. And I was sharing, and I started to think, well, these are a little bit untutored thoughts. Maybe I should study a little more.
The structure.
yeah, maybe I should find a framework to talk about this. And that's when I discovered the program at Georgetown, where I studied leadership. There's an outfit there called the Institute for Transformational Leadership. And they are the ones that trained me for a pretty intense year. It was about 36 hours a month of class time, plus tons of reading and journaling and pro bono work. And at the end of that, I became certified by the International Coaching Federation. And I've since upped that credential now, so that I'm what they call a professional coach. And that work at Georgetown really built on everything that had come before, but it took me out of myself in some ways, some important ways. I mean, so much of striving, especially in a cutthroat world like big law, is very ego driven. And there's healthy ego and there's unhealthy ego, of course, but it's very ego driven. And I just sort of reached the point where I was like, I think I want to step away from that and try living in contentment. What I have is enough. My resume is fat enough. My bank account's okay. I can pay the bills. I'm going to try settling down. I'm going to try thinking differently about my successes and failures. What have I learned? How have I grown? What areas do I have left to grow into? There's many. There were many. There still are many. So that's sort of been my journey, and it's been a real joy in the last 5 or 6 years to really dig deeply into this. I have no idea if that made any sense as a narrative, because I'm just, like I said, I'm out of practice. But that's
it feels like you're learning to be more deliberate, and in a way move slower but be more effective.
Thank you. That's insightful. I hope that's true. I've always thought of myself as a little bit of a the butterfly touching on a lot of flowers and not really focusing on any one thing. And I've tried these last few years very intentionally to do fewer things and to go deeper with them, the things that I'm committed to. I had a point in time where I was on 7 nonprofit boards simultaneously, and that's ridiculous. And as of last month, I'm down to 1. I've been gradually whittling down, and really now I'm really focusing on the one thing that I'm doing. I'm trying to do that deeply and as well as I can. And it's a different level of focus and commitment. And I'm trying that on, and so far it feels pretty good. So
it's hard. It's hard to do. I think you have a dominant empathy gene.
Yeah.
And so saying no to things, to people that are in need, saying, I don't know if I could do 7 boards.
It is hard for me to say no. I'm built for yes. I mean, I'm built for yes because I get excited about people and causes and great ideas, and I want to be part of it. And if I see a role for myself, I'm inclined to say yes. But what I'm starting to appreciate is, okay, I mean, having a small role, there are people that can do my small role better than I'm doing it, right? That really are experts, and that these organizations typically, once they get to one toe in the door, they want the rest of you, and I often wouldn't offer that.
Yeah.
So trying to do less. And
let other people have a chance. Get off those ladder rungs. Let other people.
Yeah, it's been an interesting switch.
Well, as long as I've known you, and I think it's been more than 20 years now. Yeah, I would have been 35, 37 when I met you the first time in Manly.
Manly, yep.
Yeah.
One of the great suburbs of the planet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have this dominant empathy gene, but yet you also played rugby.
Oh, I love rugby.
What is it, a thuggish sport played by gentlemen?
Yes, as opposed to soccer, which is the gentleman's game played by thugs.
That's right.
Yeah. It's funny. People have a hard time understanding that you learn to love hitting and being hit both. It's the physicality of it.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
I
There's a
think
give
there's
and take.
also
And there's a line. And if you cross that line, I'll cross my line. So don't cross my line and I won't cross your line.
yeah.
But there's what particular position did you enjoy?
In rugby, I played mostly
Yeah.
position that's called variously wing forward, flanker, or breakaway, depending on your age and your country. And that was sort of
Right.
the position that blended the forward play, which is the physical play, and the back play, which is the speed and flair positions. And I think the thing about rugby is I love the camaraderie, the so-called third half. You beat the crap out of each other for two halves, and you drink together for a third half. But it's
Right.
one of those games where when you play it, you learn something about yourself, because it takes a certain amount of courage to play. And that's nice to know you can do that,
It feels good to take a hit and get
It
up.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. When Harrison and both Harrison and Jasper played in Charlotte, well, North Carolina is still a big rugby place. They're both, one coach was from Christchurch and the other was from Johannesburg.
Absolutely.
And
I played in Charlotte, Chapel Hill, and Asheville, and Appalachian State, and Cape Fear, and all over Jacksonville.
And Harrison nor Jasper are they don't have a lot of body mass. Harrison decided early on if they couldn't catch you, you didn't get hit. They're both fast.
Yeah.
But I hope it was a useful contrast to the sort of abstract physicality of how we live now. We're disconnected from things physically. We're in our computer a lot. And yet they didn't wear helmets. And I was reassured by that because there wasn't a false sense of protection, which wearing a helmet and a bunch of pads gives you. And it's very common in football, high school football, middle school football, to kids getting hurt. And the NFL is actually dealing with now with this sort of concussive frequency of concussions in football players, because you're constantly hitting head on. If you go to a football game, you can hear the clack of the helmets just rattling. Whereas in rugby, you don't get to play rugby at first. You learn to pass and you learn to take a hit properly so that you're not constantly hitting each other head on. You can't do that. The way you hit, the way you tackle, the way you hold the legs and slide down and don't let go. And they'll come down. It's okay. You don't have to hit head on. But that the physicality without the false sense of security, with a lot of padding, a lot of helmets, and nobody got hurt. I mean, sometimes, you might hesitate to get up, but we didn't have any injuries like I saw in the high school football realm.
So you've put me on dangerous ground now, because I could talk for hours about rugby, and that's not what our listeners probably are dialing in to hear about. But there are, you're taught to tackle head up, right? So there's something in there from coaching, like beware.
Oh, right.
Be aware, right? Look around, do things head up, not with your eyes closed, not with your head down. You're taught that a small guy, your size doesn't matter. If your form is good, you can take down anybody. If you take down an NFL running back around his ankles, he's going down. And the other thing that I think about it that was an important lesson was respect. You didn't even look at the referee unless you had the captaincy on your jersey. And even then it was, "Sir, I don't understand that call." Like, you were as polite and gentle and respectful. And I
You didn't have an opinion.
I've always really admired that about the sport, that respectful, gentlemanly aspect of it. So there's some coaching elements in this somehow. I'll have to think about it.
I do. I think I'm not suggesting that we get a bunch of guys, 35 to 55 to play rugby at a leadership retreat. There's a lot of muscle memory you have to develop to hit and be hit without getting hurt or hurting someone.
Yes, this is true.
But the idea of getting hit and getting up, I think, is important. And there was an enormous amount of camaraderie, the way the teams would get together at the end and thank each other and thank themselves. It's great. Now, the other thing is that, so this rugby playing psychology lawyer that went to Duke also plays music. So you have this artist soul. And I know you're going to bring your guitar. It's just what you do. So how did that start? And what kind of What does that fulfill? What is the purpose that you get from that?
Wow. These are deep topics.
You have 3 minutes. No,
Music's always been part of my life. I started singing, well, my mom and grandma, like a lot of us, sang to me as a little kid, and sang in church choirs, and played a little bit of trombone in high school, and joined a jazz group for a while, and joined an a cappella group that toured and recorded. So it's always been part of my life. It brings me a deep, deep happiness to be involved in music and be around musicians, and something I really couldn't live without at this point in my life. And yeah, I don't even. These are deep waters, Phil, for me.
No, it's important to you.
It is self-expression, but it's also, I love it's the deep communication that goes on among musicians. I love the quote. I think it was Leonard Bernstein, the great conductor, composer.
Yeah,
he had a particularly pleasing performance in New York, and he went over to the first violinist and said, "You gave me exactly what I wanted. How did you know?" And he said, the violinist said, "You arched your eyebrow." And I've always loved
all
that
little nonverbal,
that idea of deep connection, of that coming from such a richly authentic, open, democratic place that allows that kind of communication, is so powerful and magical and wonderful. And so, yeah, that's part of my answer.
Well, I hope to see you with your guitar in about 12 weeks.
I'll be there.
Today's the 23rd. We're going to show up on the 25th.
Yeah.
So July, August, September. Yeah.
I'm really, really looking forward to it.
And anyone else, people say, "Can I bring my instrument?" I said, "Yes, please bring your acoustic instrument." And it'll be wonderful. And let's have another chat soon. Thank you very much, buddy.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it.